Chewashte wa yukan na petu ki sampaska na ampi na wachi ampe ohe unkish lewayanka unko kihipi na tokata iha helwa unkichi yanka pikta hamako chewashte helwa unkichi yanka pikta. Vitrako yapi, hihani washte. Good morning, my relatives. Well, you guys talk back. I am grateful to be living in the beautiful lands of the indigenous hosts, the Spokane people. When I speak in homelands that are not my own, it's proper to ask for permission to do so. So once when I was getting ready to do a seminar downtown on the doctrine of discovery, I did that. I asked, is there a Spokane descendant here so I can humbly ask your permission to speak in your homelands? And an elder stood up and she received my gift, which gave me permission to speak. I was very honored to learn later that she was a revered Spokane elder, Deborah Abrahamson. So now I feel I can proceed with respect. So why is it important to recognize indigenous hosts and their homelands? Because they're still here. History and politics and Disney would erase us, but the land remembers us. I recently received a note of empathy from a friend who was prepping to take her kids to Disneyland. So they started to watch Peter Pan, and even their elementary school child was appalled at the racist way that Indians are presented in the movie. Their skin was bright red, and they were hopping around the fire, chanting, "What made the red man say, ugh?" So caricatures like this and mascotry that still thrives in sports tries to erase who we really are. The land itself, though, is a witness that indigenous ancestors lived in this region for thousands of years in a reciprocal relationship, meaning that the land provided for the people, and the people did not take without giving back, and the people did not take more than they needed. Spokane oral tradition says that the Spokane were always here. They were created in their homelands, just like our Lakota creation story says. Archaeological evidence supports human habitation in this area 12,000 years back, and the Spokane oral tradition speaks of the last ice age. By comparison, settlers have only been here for a blink of time without the same relationship to the land. So land acknowledgement is essential for relationship and for reconciliation. It affirms that we reject the diseased ideology of the doctrine of discovery that dehumanized indigenous inhabitants. European explorers were authorized by the church, and that time the Pope was the church. They could declare new lands empty if the inhabitants were not Christian. They could claim the land and the resources and exterminate or subjugate the inhabitants, who they were considered not human because they were not Christian. In 1823, the Supreme Court instituted that discovery principle into American law in the landmark case of Johnson versus McIntosh, when it ruled that Native people only have a right to occupancy in their homelands and no right to property title. Once property title was removed from Native people, the Indian Removal Act of 1830 removed the bodies too. That act was legal, but it wasn't humane. And that law is how I came to be born on a reservation and why the federal government still owns our reservation lands for us. So all this to say that an informed land acknowledgement is one way to heal together so we can reset broken norms towards affirming Imago Dei. All people have the innate dignity of being created in the image of God. Now to introduce myself, my name is Lenore 3 Stars, and I am Oglala Lakota, one of the 7 bands of the Lakota, which makes up the Teton division of the Oceti Sakowin. And the Oceti Sakowin is the 7 council fires, also known as the Great Sioux Nation. My father was Oglala Lakota from the Pine Ridge Reservation, where I was born, and my mother is Minikoju Lakota, another of the 7 Lakota bands, from the Cheyenne River Reservation, also in South Dakota. Our ancestral lands include Chesapa, the Black Hills, a sacred land where our creation story lives. I introduce myself in terms of kinship because in Lakota culture, the family system, the Tioshbaye, is foundational. It teaches us to practice relationships of respect, and it shapes our kinship roles and responsibilities. I think it has been the strength of our people throughout our harsh history. So I know when other natives ask me, where are you from? What they're really asking me is, who are your people? And then my answer gives them my connection to the land. So today, I offer you an indigenous perspective of the gospel through the lens of my own worldview. If you've ever heard me speak before, you've heard me talk about an indigenous worldview and how that relates to a theology of the land. Some things just bear repeating, so then we can expand it from there. Now, I don't represent all 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States. I'm just speaking for myself. We all know there is no such thing as a culture-free gospel. We all have worldviews. Maybe you have considered what shapes your worldview. How have you made sense of the world around you and your place in it? When I called you Mitakoyapi, my relatives, I was expressing a Lakota worldview. In Lakota, Mitakoyasi translates to all my relations, and it means we are all related. We're related to each other, we're related to Creator, and we're related to all parts of creation. When we call all parts of creation our relatives, then we are bringing respect into those relationships. In this way of life, we are called to do all we can to be a good relative. So, Mitakoyapi, how did we become related? Scripture supports this relational way of thinking. In Genesis 28, God made a promise to Abraham and his sons, "Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you and your offspring." Romans 8 tells us that the Spirit of God brought about our adoption, and it says that all creation is waiting for restoration and healing right alongside us. So we are all related. Now, I speak of Creator, and when I say Creator, I'm referring to Jesus. The presence and agency of Jesus in the act of creation is affirmed in John 1:3 and Colossians 1:16 and many other places, that all things were created in him and through him. Heaven and earth and in the universe, visible and invisible, through Creator Jesus. Our Lakota creation story also explains what makes us related. Eon, the spirit or the force of creation, made all parts of creation bit by bit using its blood until Eon's blood was all used up. Since all creation, human and non-human, was made from Eon's blood, that made us related. In Lakota culture, if you're not already related by your bloodline or by marriage, you can make a relative, hunkakaha. This adoption or honoring is as strong as any family relationship sometimes stronger. And that's what Mom did with Leslie, her Hunka daughter. So treating each other with respect as relatives dovetails into Mark 12:31, which calls us to love our neighbors as ourselves. There's no qualification as to who is my neighbor. When we're all related, everybody's your neighbor. Kituwa Cherokee author Randy Woodley wrote, "All parts of creation need each other in order to live in harmony in the community of creation." He and his wife Edith are living out a vision that he was given in a dream about a reciprocal land relationship and a co-learning community. They established that, in fact, 3 times. This last time at Yamhill, Oregon. But they established that, and they call it Elahe, which is a Cherokee word that speaks to harmony, shalom. Lakota elder Albert Whitehat wrote that we try to live out Lakota virtues like Wowachintanka, perseverance, Wo'ohitika, courage, Chantayuka, generosity, and Wokshape, wisdom, so that we can have Wichozani, and that is the good health that lives in harmony with all creation. So what happens when a right relationship of harmony is broken? We do our part to regain balance, to move back towards the original design of a right relationship. A good relative does the spiritual, the holistic, the embodied work towards balance, which can include little practical steps or ceremony. We're all lifelong learners, so as I listen and learn, I ask myself, does this help me be a good relative? So this brings us to our land relationship. An indigenous worldview generally relates to a relationship with the land that you don't usually find in Western culture. In the Hebrew creation story, Adam is created from Adama, the earth. So that seems to say mankind is the earth. Or maybe another way to say that mankind and the land belong to each other. The spiritual connection is old, and it's meant to be deep. We are rooted in creation. We are dust, and to dust we shall return. Psalm 24 reflects the biblical theme that all creation is sacred. The land is the Lord's and all that is in it. In Lakota, we call the earth Inamaka, Mother Earth, or Unchimaka, Grandmother Earth. Both are kinship terms of deep respect because we are related. Earth is my relative, not property that I dominate. I like to use the kinship term Unchimaka because my Takojas, my grandchildren, call me Unchi, although my grandson is taken to calling me Unchos. I don't know why. Sounds like nachos. But I'm from the Oglala band, which translates as scatter one's own. And to pantomime an understanding of this meaning, a Lakota elder made the motions of sprinkling her arm with earth, with soil, to indicate that we come from the land. This connection, this land relationship is spiritual and deep. We belong to the land, not the other way around. Each native creation story places the people in a particular geographical location, which is their spiritual connection to place. It's not portable. We can't take that across the ocean. I have a theory that at one time, all the peoples had a deep connection to their ancestral lands. But that connection was severed when they left, and that caused what I call land trauma for them. When they arrived in our lands, they tried to fill that spiritual void by taking our ancestral lands. But property does not satisfy. Only a land relationship will heal that land trauma and satisfy your spirit. I think this is a healing that we could do together. This spiritual connection to place is foundational to Native identity and culture. This is why Andrew Jackson's Indian Removal Act of 1830 was so destructive to Native life. It not only created many death marches of many tribes like the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Seminole, and the Navajo to get them off of their homelands, but it was a way of brutally ripping out their spiritual roots. Pulitzer author Scott Momaday, who was Kiowa, said, "You cannot separate the Native American from the landscape. It is his spirit." This is why we saw the water protectors at Standing Rock willing to die to keep the pipeline from destroying the relatives in creation. This is why we see the same thing in the land of the Wet'suwet'en in Canada, the murderers of the forest defenders in Ecuador, the butterfly activists in Mexico, and the death culture right now in the Amazon rainforest. Extraction is killing creation and destroying balance. Indigenous people everywhere, globally, have a relationship and identification with the land. They see themselves as part of creation, not above it. Sarah Augustine's book, The Land is Not Empty, describes how this continues. The doctrine of discovery continues to legalize extraction and destruction around the world right now. It's not historical. But even if one exegetes Genesis in a way that places humans at the top, having dominion over all creation, that dominion comes with the responsibility to be co-sustaining stewards. What we're seeing now is not sustainable. You don't have to be Indigenous to recognize the sacred land relationship, though. Though I do like to say Wendell Berry had a Lakota heart when he wrote, "There are no unsacred places. There are only the sacred and the desecrated." So you have at least one worldview that speaks, maybe silently, to your relationship to the land. What would you want that relationship to look like? We're influenced by so many isms, such as capitalism, that sees land only in terms of productivity. How can we temper dualisms and lean into balance? In a presentation about lament, Sumcha Ra once asked, "Are we hearing the voices of the marginalized, those suffering, or the voices of the privileged speaking for the marginalized? Are we in a place now where we can hear the voice of creation, or do we treat creation as an inanimate object having no agency, no voice?" In 2018, you might remember that grieving Orca mother, Tahlequah. She had held her dead calf up with her nose around the waters in Puget Sound in an unusual ceremony of grief. It lasted for 17 days, and she swam 1,000 miles. Experts say that the calves in that pod were not surviving, and the baby's death seemed to be an unusually emotional hardship on Tahlequah. She expressed her unusual grief for all to see. Once I was sitting in Murdoch training for board members. I'm on the board of Circlewood, a nonprofit that sees creation care as an integral part of our faith. As we processed our core values and our board culture, we were asked, who is the primary beneficiary of Circlewood? Immediately, Unchimaka popped into my mind, Grandmother Earth. As I listened to the other answers, which of course were people, my epiphany was I knew my purpose on that board. In my heart, I was doing this for Unchimaka, my relative. That came right from my Indigenous worldview, but I think creation care can be discipled by a church that understands that all creation is sacred, and we have broken right relationship with our toxic ways of extraction. We can hear the warning of Leviticus 18 that the land can become defiled by the actions of the peoples, and the land vomits them out. We must find that balance. I do believe that creation has agency, has voice, and a capacity for expression. Today I hear Unchimaka crying out in a lament that she once knew goodness and care, but she now suffers desecration and a violent extraction of her being. She cries out in earthquakes, floods, fires, and heat waves, lamenting a deep loss of relationship with humankind. Randy Woodley wrote a book, Becoming Rooted, 100 Days of Reconnecting with Sacred Earth. He wrote that we are all indigenous to someplace from somewhere. We were all indigenous people who understood how to live with the land instead of on the land. He suggests, open yourselves up to that reality embedded deep within your own DNA, your very own identity. So Randy's book offers 100 days of short meditations followed by a practical observance to help us learn from the greatest teacher, Earth herself. We can have a fruitful relationship of mutual caring. We can see ourselves as participants, not merely observers. Creation is not the stage for the human story. It's a community. Where I have broken relationship with Unchimaka, I must practice ways to live in balance. It can be something daily, like don't run the tap water like it's limitless, because it's not. Or when I turn off the faucet to suds my hands, I think that's water I saved for my Takojas. Water connects you to earth, to Unchimaka. Indigenous people say that water is our first medicine. So how do you regard your first drink of water of the day? Could you express gratitude? Maybe a poem, a song, a drawing. This poem by Abigail Echohawk, who is Pawnee, speaks to my heart. Call me by the name of the land I was stolen from, the place that knows my name, the names of my ancestors. Every day she calls me home and I'm learning how to answer. Rob's Easter sermon included the thought that resurrection also points to the healing for the land. And I agree, the work of reconciliation must include the land, just as the ultimate healing of salvation will include the land. And by now you can probably figure out why I favor that hymn that I opened up with, The Sweet By and By. There's a beautiful land image in this hymn that speaks of being rooted in creation. There's a land that is fairer than day, and by faith we can see it afar. I've heard many references for the place that we go to after we leave this world, and one of them is the beautiful land. Jesus said in John 14, I go to prepare a place for you, and I will come back and take you to be with me. This all reminds me of the tree of life image. It's there in the garden of creation. There's a tree reference at the cross of suffering. And the tree is there again in the beautiful land, the healed land of Shalom. Revelation 22 says, the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. And when I hear that, that includes not just people, but the buffalo nation, the horse nation, the nations of all creation. Romans 8:21 tells us that creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the glorious freedom of the children of God. The whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth, right up to the present time as we eagerly await the redemption of our bodies. So may I leave you with this thought. If we cannot move closer to an indigenous worldview of treating all creation as sacred, independent, as relatives, then we will fail to preserve a world in which we can live. Living in this world is not about a linear or orthodoxy of waiting for restoration at the end. It's about a continuous orthopraxy of finding balance, of being a good relative every day. So we don't lose heart. The Spirit is everywhere present in the cosmos, always working out a redemptive healing purpose. I'll close with this kinship prayer poem by Abigail Echo Hawk. Creator, hear me, a voice I send. I am whole and perfect only when I remember that you are in me and with me. I am whole and perfect only when I remember to see you in all creation. You are in every star and in every cloud, in every rock and in every plant, in every seed and in every drop of rain. You are in the mighty and the meek. You are in the two-leggeds and the four-leggeds. You are in those who swim and in those who fly. It is your breath that moves the wind, and your song that sings in the streams. In all these things I see you, and I know that they too are your children. They are my brothers and my sisters. The earth is my mother, my grandmother. Mitaku Yasin for all my relations. Amen.